A lone rider appeared on the horizon as the crimson sun dipped below the jagged mountain peaks of Wyoming Territory, 1879. Katherine Vance clutched her father's pocket watch, its smooth silver case offering little comfort against the growing darkness and the knowledge that she was utterly alone. The stagecoach that had abandoned her at this desolate way station after breaking an axle had promised another would arrive by nightfall. But as the stars began to pierce the indigo sky, Katherine knew that promise, like so many others in her 22 years, would remain unfulfilled. The approaching horseman slowed his mount, dust swirling around the powerful stallion's hooves. Katherine tensed, one hand moving to the small derringer hidden in the folds of her travel-worn skirt. In these wild lands, a woman alone invited trouble from men with intentions as dark as the gathering night. "Evening, madam," the rider called, his voice deep and clear in the still air. He tipped his worn leather hat, revealing a face weathered by sun and wind, but with eyes that held no malice, only a careful curiosity. "Stage leave you behind?" "The axle broke some miles back," Katherine replied, keeping her voice steady despite her apprehension. "They promised another by nightfall." The stranger dismounted with the fluid grace of a man who'd spent more time in the saddle than on his feet. Up close, he stood tall, broad-shouldered, with a day's worth of stubble shadowing a strong jawline. "Name's Matthew Tanner. Most folks call me Matt." He gestured toward the darkening trail. "No stage coming tonight. There was trouble at Miller's Crossing Bridge washed out after yesterday's storm." Fear gripped Katherine's heart. The way station was little more than a crude shelter with a leaking roof and walls that would offer scant protection against the dangers of the night, both animal and human. "I'm Katherine Vance," she offered, unsure whether this man represented salvation or another peril. Matt Tanner glanced at the dilapidated station and then back at the eastern horizon where the first stars were appearing. "Madam, there's a ranch about an hour's ride from here. My employer's place. Mrs. Hollister runs a decent house. She'd put you up proper till the next stage comes through." "And why should I trust you, Mr. Tanner?" Katherine asked, her fingers still resting on the hidden derringer. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Reckon you shouldn't, not knowing me from Adam. But wolves come down from the hills at night, and they ain't the worst things roaming these parts after dark." As if to punctuate his warning, a distant howl echoed across the plains. Katherine suppressed a shiver. She'd been raised to be cautious, especially of men with disarming smiles and gentle eyes, but her options were dwindling with the daylight. "I have a letter of introduction to Sheriff James Reeves in Sweetwater," she said, drawing herself up to her full height. "I'm expected." Matt nodded, respect flashing in his eyes at her attempt to establish a connection to authority. "Sheriff Reeves is a good man. Known him for years." He glanced at the darkening sky again. "Look there, Miss Vance." Katherine followed his gaze upward just as a streak of brilliant light cut across the heavens, a shooting star burning bright against the deepening blue. "Where I come from, that's a good omen," Matt said quietly. "My ma used to say a falling star is God's way of listening to prayers." For reasons she couldn't explain, the simple observation loosened something in Katherine's chest. "My father said much the same," she admitted. "If you're willing, we should ride now while there's still some light," Matt suggested, keeping a respectful distance. "I give you my word as a gentleman that no harm will come to you under my watch." Katherine made her decision, nodding once. "Very well, Mr. Tanner." Matt helped her mount his horse, his hands strong but careful as he lifted her onto the saddle. He took the reins and began leading the animal on foot. "You're walking?" Katherine asked, surprised. "Yes, madam. Horse has been carrying me all day. Besides," he added with a slight smile, "a gentleman doesn't ride while a lady walks." As they traveled across the open prairie, the last light faded completely, leaving only the silver glow of a rising moon and the diamond-like brilliance of stars overhead. Another shooting star streaked across the sky, and Matt paused, looking up. "Another fell tonight," he said softly. "Make a wish, Miss Vance." Katherine closed her eyes briefly. "I'm afraid I've lost faith in wishes, Mr. Tanner." He continued walking, the leather of his boots creaking slightly with each step. "Out here, a person needs something to believe in, even if it's just shooting stars." "And what do you believe in, Mr. Tanner?" she asked, curious despite herself. He was quiet for so long she thought he might not answer. Finally, he said, "I believe a man makes his own way, but sometimes the Almighty sends signs to guide him, like stars falling from heaven." They traveled in companionable silence after that, the rhythmic sound of hoofbeats and boots on hard-packed earth the only conversation. An hour later, just as Matt had promised, lights appeared in the distance, the welcoming glow of lanterns from a substantial ranch house. Mrs. Hollister proved to be exactly as Matt had described, a no-nonsense widow of 50 with shrewd eyes and a kind heart. She welcomed Katherine without question, showing her to a small but clean bedroom and promising hot water for washing. "Matthew Tanner's word is good as gold in these parts," Mrs. Hollister explained as she helped Katherine with her travel case. "Not many men I'd trust to escort a young woman after dark, but that one's different. Lost his parents young, raised himself mostly, but somehow kept his decency." Katherine slept soundly that night, exhaustion overcoming her usual wariness in strange surroundings. In the morning, she learned that Matt had departed before dawn on ranch business, but had left word that he would return to escort her to Sweetwater when the next stage was due 3 days hence. Those 3 days at the Hollister Ranch gave Katherine time to recover from her journey. She had traveled from Boston following her father's death, armed with little more than determination and the name of her father's oldest friend, Sheriff Reeves, who had promised assistance in claiming a small property her father had purchased years ago but never visited. On the third evening, Katherine sat on the ranch house porch, watching the sunset paint the western sky in hues of gold and crimson. The sound of approaching hoofbeats drew her attention, and she recognized Matt's tall figure silhouetted against the fading light. He dismounted, removing his hat as he approached the porch. "Evening, Miss Vance." "Mrs. Hollister." He nodded to the older woman who had joined Katherine. "Stage should be through tomorrow around noon. I'll escort Miss Vance to the station in the morning, if that's agreeable." Mrs. Hollister excused herself after a few pleasantries, leaving Katherine alone with the cowboy. He remained standing, hat in hand, maintaining a respectful distance. "Please sit, Mr. Tanner," Katherine invited, gesturing to the empty chair beside her. "I'd like to properly thank you for your assistance." Matt settled his tall frame into the chair, placing his hat on his knee. "No thanks needed, madam. Just doing what any decent man would." "Nevertheless, I'm grateful. I've learned that decency isn't as common as one might hope." She studied his profile in the fading light. "Mrs. Hollister speaks very highly of you." A slight flush colored his tanned cheeks. "Mrs. Hollister's been kind to me since I was a boy. My parents died of fever when I was 12. Mr. Hollister gave me work when I had nowhere else to go." "I'm sorry about your parents," Katherine said softly. "I lost my mother when I was young, and my father passed the spring." Matt's eyes, the color of a summer sky, met hers with genuine sympathy. "That's a heavy burden. Is that what brings you to Wyoming Territory?" "Family." Katherine explained about the property her father had purchased during a brief period of prosperity. "It's all I have left of him now, 20 acres and a cabin near Sweetwater. Sheriff Reeves has been holding the deed for me." Matt nodded thoughtfully. "I know the area. Good land, if you're planning to stay." "I have nothing to return to in Boston," Katherine admitted. "My father's debts consumed everything except this property he'd almost forgotten purchasing. I intend to make a new start here." As they talked, the first stars appeared overhead. Suddenly, Matt pointed upward. "Look there." A brilliant shooting star traced a path across the heavens, its fiery trail briefly illuminating their upturned faces before fading into darkness. Another fell tonight, Matt murmured. Then, almost shyly, my mother had a saying about shooting stars. She said if two people witness one together, it binds their fates somehow. Katherine smiled, finding unexpected comfort in the superstition. Let's keep it then, she said softly. A good omen for new beginnings. The next morning, Matt helped Katherine onto his spare horse, a gentle mare borrowed from the ranch for the journey to the stagecoach station. The ride was pleasant, the late summer air crisp and fragrant with prairie wildflowers. Matt pointed out landmarks along the way, his knowledge of the territory extensive and his manner increasingly relaxed in her company. The stage should arrive around noon, he explained as they approached the station, a more substantial building than the abandoned way station where they'd first met. Sheriff Reeves knows you're coming? Yes, I sent a telegram before leaving Denver, Katherine confirmed. Matt nodded, a flicker of something like regret crossing his features. Sweetwater's a decent town. You'll find good people there. They dismounted at the station, and Matt carried Katherine's travel case inside. The station master confirmed that the stage was on schedule, expected within the hour. As they waited on the rough-hewn bench outside, Katherine found herself reluctant for their brief acquaintance to end. Mr. Tanner, Matt, she began, breaking the comfortable silence between them. I want to thank you again for your kindness. He looked at her directly, his gaze clear and honest. It was my privilege, Miss Vance. Katherine, she corrected gently. A slow smile spread across his face, transforming his weathered features. Katherine, he repeated, the name sounding different in his deep voice. The distant rumble of the approaching stagecoach interrupted the moment. As it came into view, dust billowing behind the team of 6 horses, Matt stood and offered his hand to help Katherine to her feet. I wish you well in your new life, he said formally, though his eyes conveyed more than his words. Katherine impulsively reached into her reticule and withdrew a calling card. If you're ever in Sweetwater, she said, pressing it into his palm. His fingers closed around the small card as carefully as if it were made of gold. I just might be, he replied, a new warmth in his voice. The stagecoach arrived in a clatter of hooves and creaking leather. As the driver secured her luggage, Katherine turned once more to the tall cowboy. Perhaps we'll see another shooting star someday, Mr. Tanner. He tipped his hat, a smile touching his lips. I'll be watching the skies, Miss Vance. The journey to Sweetwater passed in a blur of dust and motion, Katherine's thoughts frequently returning to the cowboy who had come to her aid. By late afternoon, the stagecoach rolled into the main street of Sweetwater, a growing town with wooden sidewalks, a church steeple rising above the other buildings, and the promise of civilization after days of wilderness. Sheriff James Reeves met the stage, his weathered face breaking into a smile of recognition as Katherine descended. Miss Vance, you're the spitting image of your father. He took her gloved hand between his calloused ones. Welcome to Sweetwater. Edward wrote that you'd be coming, though I'm sorry for the circumstances. The sheriff escorted her to a modest but well-maintained hotel, explaining that he'd arranged a room for her until she could assess the property she'd inherited. It's about 3 miles outside town, he explained as they walked. Haven't been out there myself in some time, but last I knew, the cabin was still standing. Land's good has a creek running through it. That evening, after settling into her hotel room, Katherine joined Sheriff Reeves for dinner in the hotel restaurant. Between bites of surprisingly well-prepared roast beef, the older man shared stories of her father from their youth. Your pa and I came west together after the war, he reminisced. He had adventure in his blood then. Bought that parcel of land on a whim during a prosperous month. Always talked about bringing your mother out here, building a proper life away from the city. Mother's health wouldn't have permitted it, Katherine said softly. Her lungs were never strong. The sheriff nodded sympathetically. Edward wrote about her passing. Said afterward, he couldn't bear to visit the land, too many broken dreams attached to it. But he kept the deed current, paid the taxes every year. Said someday it might be a legacy for you. It's all I have left now, Katherine admitted. His investments failed one after another in his final years. Medical expenses consumed what remained. Well, 20 acres won't make you rich, Sheriff Reeves said pragmatically, but it's good land. Could support a small herd, crops too with proper irrigation from the creek. Enough for a determined person to build something worthwhile. The next morning, Sheriff Reeves arranged for a wagon to take Katherine to inspect her property. As they traveled the rutted road leading out of town, anticipation mingled with anxiety in her chest. This land represented her future, her only hope for independence. The wagon crested a gentle rise, and suddenly the property spread before them, rolling meadow dotted with wildflowers, a line of cottonwood trees marking the path of a creek, and nestled against a backdrop of distant mountains, a small cabin that had weathered years of neglect but remained structurally sound. "It's beautiful," Katherine breathed, emotion tightening her throat as she imagined her father standing in this same spot, seeing the same vista, planning a life that never came to be. The driver helped her down from the wagon, and Sheriff Reeves led her on a tour of the cabin, a simple two-room structure with a stone fireplace, its windows dusty but intact, the roof in need of some repair but still offering shelter. "Needs work," the sheriff acknowledged, "but nothing that can't be fixed with time and effort. The question is, what do you plan to do with it?" Katherine moved to the cabin's single window, gazing out at the land that was now hers. "I plan to live here," she said with quiet determination. "Make it my home." The sheriff's bushy eyebrows rose in surprise. "Alone? That's no life for a young woman, Katherine. These territories are hard on men, harder still on women without protection." "I have some funds remaining," she explained. "Enough to make repairs, purchase basic supplies. I can grow vegetables, perhaps raise chickens. I've learned to be resourceful, Sheriff." He shook his head, concern evident in his lined face. "Resourcefulness won't stop rustlers or keep wolves from your door. You'd need help, hired hands, at least." Over the next week, Katherine divided her time between town purchasing supplies, arranging for repairs to the cabin and the property itself, cleaning years of dust and abandonment from what would become her home. Sheriff Reeves, though clearly skeptical of her plan, provided introductions to reputable merchants and craftsmen. On her third visit to the property, Katherine arrived to find an unexpected sight: a tall figure mending the cabin's sagging porch, the rhythmic sound of his hammer echoing across the meadow. "Mr. Tanner?" she called in disbelief as she approached. Matt straightened, wiping his brow with his sleeve before touching the brim of his hat. "Miss Vance. Hope you don't mind the presumption." "Not at all. But how did you know where to find me?" A slight smile crossed his face. "Small territories have long memories." Asked Sheriff Reeves about a Boston lady claiming property near Sweetwater. "He mentioned you were fixing up Edward Vance's old place." He gestured toward the partially repaired porch. "Thought you might need a hand." "That's very kind, but I can't accept charity," Katherine began. "Not charity," Matt interrupted gently. "Considerate payment for the privilege of your company. Ranch work's been slow, and I had some time. Besides," he added, his blue eyes meeting hers directly, "been thinking about those shooting stars we saw." Heat rose in Katherine's cheeks that had nothing to do with the autumn sun. "Have you seen any more since then?" she asked, her voice lighter than she intended. "Been watching," he admitted. "But some things are rare enough that a man remembers them." They worked together for the remainder of the afternoon, Katherine sweeping decades of dust from the cabin's plank floors while Matt continued repairs to the porch and roof. As the sun began its descent toward the western mountains, they sat on the newly sturdy porch steps, sharing the simple meal Katherine had brought from town. "Sheriff Reeves thinks I'm being foolish," Katherine said, breaking the comfortable silence. "Trying to make a life here alone." Matt considered this, his expression thoughtful. "It won't be easy," he acknowledged. "But I've seen determination in your eyes since the first moment we met. If anyone could succeed, I'd wager on you. His faith, offered so simply, warmed something deep within her. The sheriff suggested I should sell the land and return east. Is that what you want? Matt asked, his voice neutral, though something flickered in his eyes. Katherine shook her head firmly.
No.
This land was my father's dream. Now it's mine. I've nothing left in Boston but memories, most of them painful. Then you stay, Matt said, as if it were settled. And you won't be alone. Neighbors help each other out here. It's the way of things. Are you my neighbor, Mr. Tanner? Katherine asked, surprised by her own boldness. A slow smile spread across his face. I could be. Hollister Ranch borders your western property line. Just over that rise. He nodded toward the setting sun. Been saving to buy my own spread someday, but in the meantime, I'm close enough to lend a hand when needed. In the weeks that followed, a routine developed. Katherine stayed in town during the week, taking temporary work at the mercantile to supplement her dwindling funds. Weekends she spent at the cabin, gradually transforming it into a home with simple furnishings purchased secondhand or crafted by her own hands. Matt appeared regularly, never intruding but always finding ways to help repairing fences, chopping firewood for the coming winter, teaching Katherine the basics of caring for the 2 milk cows and half-dozen chickens she'd acquired. Sometimes they worked in companionable silence. Other times, they shared stories of their lives, gradually filling in the spaces between them with knowledge of each other. Katherine learned that Matt had educated himself through borrowed books and determination, that he could recite Shakespeare from memory, that he dreamed of breeding horses someday on land of his own. In turn, she shared her childhood in Boston, her love of music, her father's kindness and eventual decline. As October painted the cottonwoods gold along the creek, Katherine finally moved permanently into the cabin. The night before her departure from town, Sheriff Reeves paid her a visit at the hotel. "You're determined to go through with this?" he asked, his concern evident. "I am," Katherine confirmed. "The cabin is ready now, and winter will arrive soon. I need to establish myself before the snow." The sheriff sighed heavily. "Your father would have my hide for letting you do this. At least consider taking on a boarder, perhaps one of the school teachers, or a respectable widow. A woman alone invites trouble." "I'm not alone," Katherine said firmly. "I have neighbors. Mr. Tanner from Hollister Ranch has been especially helpful." A knowing look crossed the sheriff's weathered face. "Matthew Tanner, eh? Known that boy since he was knee-high to a grasshopper."
Good man.
Quiet, but solid. He studied her face. "Is there something brewing there I should know about?" Katherine felt color rise in her cheeks. "Mr. Tanner has been a perfect gentleman and a good friend. Nothing more." The sheriff's mustache twitched with suppressed amusement. "If you say so. But I've seen the way he looks at you when he thinks no one's watching." The following day, Matt arrived with a wagon to transport Katherine's remaining belongings to the cabin. As they drove through the golden afternoon, Katherine found herself studying his profile, the straight nose, firm jawline, the way the corners of his eyes crinkled when he smiled. "Sheriff Reeves still thinks I'm making a mistake," she said as they approached her property. Matt glanced at her, then returned his attention to the road. "And what do you think?" "I think." Katherine paused, considering. "I think sometimes a person has to follow their heart, even when others call it foolishness." Something shifted in Matt's expression, a softening, a hopefulness. "That's a philosophy I can stand behind." That evening, after helping Katherine settle her belongings in the cabin, Matt built a fire in the stone fireplace. The dancing flames cast warm light throughout the small main room, transforming the simple space into something almost magical. "I should be going," Matt said reluctantly, standing by the door, hat in hand. "Getting dark." "Stay for supper at least," Katherine invited. They ate by firelight, the autumn wind occasionally rattling the newly repaired windows. As they finished the simple meal, Matt reached into his vest pocket and withdrew something small. "Made you something," he said, suddenly shy as he extended his hand. In his palm lay a delicately carved wooden star, polished to a soft glow, with a small hole drilled through one point. "For remembering," he explained. "Thought you might wear it on a ribbon or a string." Katherine took the gift, turning it in her fingers, emotion tightening her throat at the hours of careful work evident in the perfect symmetry. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "Thank you." Matt cleared his throat, standing abruptly. "Like I said, getting dark. Should head back to the ranch." At the door, he paused, turning back to her with uncharacteristic hesitation. "There's a harvest dance in town next Saturday. Wondering if you might consider attending. With me." The unexpected invitation sent a flutter through Katherine's chest. "I'd like that very much," she replied, her voice steadier than she felt. His smile, rare and transformative, illuminated his face. "I'll come for you around 4 then." After he departed, Katherine stood in the doorway of her cabin, watching his tall figure disappear into the gathering darkness. The wooden star pressed against her palm, a tangible reminder of something growing between them, something as yet unnamed, but increasingly precious. The week passed in a flurry of activity as Katherine established her new routine. She planted a small winter garden as Matt had suggested, prepared the chicken coop for colder weather, and continued organizing her modest home. Each evening, she found herself watching the night sky, searching for falling stars and thinking of a pair of blue eyes that seemed to see directly into her soul. Saturday arrived clear and crisp, the kind of perfect autumn day that seemed designed for celebration. Katherine took special care with her appearance, wearing her best dress, a deep blue wool that brought out the amber flecks in her brown eyes. Around her neck, suspended from a blue ribbon, hung the wooden star Matt had carved. He arrived precisely at 4, driving a freshly polished wagon. Katherine's breath caught at the sight of him clean-shaven, wearing a new shirt and vest, his usually unruly hair tamed for the occasion. "You look beautiful," he said simply as he helped her into the wagon, his calloused hand warm around hers. The harvest dance was held in the town hall, a large wooden building decorated with autumn leaves and bundles of wheat. Lanterns hung from the rafters, casting a golden glow over the gathering. It seemed half the county had turned out, families with children, young couples, old-timers sharing benches along the walls. Sheriff Reeves approached as they entered, his eyebrows rising at the sight of them together. "Miss Vance, Matthew," he greeted them, a knowing smile beneath his mustache. "Fine evening for a celebration." The local musician struck up a lively tune, and Matt turned to Katherine with a questioning look. "May I have this dance?" His hand at her waist felt right, natural, as they joined the other couples on the wooden floor. Matt moved with surprising grace for such a tall man, guiding Katherine through the steps with confidence. "You dance well, Mr. Tanner," she observed, breathless from both the exertion and his proximity. A smile touched his lips. "Mrs. Hollister insisted I learn. Said no girl would look twice at a man who couldn't dance proper." "Mrs. Hollister is a wise woman," Katherine replied, returning his smile. As the evening progressed, they rarely left each other's side. During a pause between dances, Matt brought Katherine a cup of punch and nodded toward the wooden star at her throat. "You're wearing it," he said softly, pleasure evident in his voice. Katherine's fingers touched the carving. "Of course. It reminds me of promises." His eyes held hers, a question in their depths. Before he could speak, the musicians began a slow waltz. Without words, Matt extended his hand, and Katherine stepped into his embrace. They moved together as if they'd danced 1,000 times before, her skirts brushing his legs, his hand warm and steady at her back. Around them, other couples turned and swayed, but Katherine saw only Matt, the intensity in his blue eyes, the slight flush on his tanned cheeks, the way his gaze occasionally dropped to her lips. As the music faded, Matt didn't immediately release her. "Would you walk outside with me?" he asked, his voice low. "Getting warm in here." The night air was cool and refreshing after the heat of the dance hall. Stars glittered overhead, diamond bright against the velvet darkness. Matt led Katherine to a bench beneath a large oak tree, its leaves rustling softly in the gentle breeze. "Katherine," he began, her name sounding like a caress in his deep voice. "These past weeks, getting to know you." He paused, seeming to search for words. She waited, her heart beating a rapid rhythm against her ribs. "I've never met anyone like you," he continued finally. "Your courage, your determination, the way you see beauty in simple things." His hand found hers, large and warm as it enveloped her smaller one. "I find myself thinking about you when we're apart, wondering what you're doing, if you're safe, if you're happy." "I think of you too," Katherine admitted softly, her voice steady despite the emotion threatening to overwhelm her. "More than I should, perhaps." Matt's fingers tightened around hers.
I'm not a wealthy man.
"Don't have much to offer except my hands and my heart. But both are yours if you'll have them." The simple declaration, spoken without flowery phrases or grand promises, touched Katherine deeply. This was no practiced courtship from a polished suitor like those she'd known in Boston. This was raw truth from a man who lived by honesty and direct speech. "I don't need wealth," she answered, turning to face him fully. "I've seen what the pursuit of money did to my father, how it consumed his joy and eventually his health. What I need is exactly what you've offered: strong hands and a true heart." The hope that blazed in Matt's eyes stole her breath. Slowly, giving her every chance to withdraw, he leaned forward. His lips met hers in a kiss so gentle it brought tears to her eyes, a kiss that carried respect and tenderness and the promise of deeper passion to come. When they finally parted, Matt rested his forehead against hers, his breathing uneven. "I've wanted to do that since the moment I saw you standing alone at that way station," he confessed. Katherine smiled, reaching up to touch his face, the slight roughness of evening stubble beneath her fingertips. "I'm glad you waited. Some things are better for the anticipation." Above them, a brilliant streak of light cut across the heavens, a shooting star so bright it momentarily illuminated their upturned faces. "Another fell tonight," Matt whispered, his eyes reflecting starlight. "Let's keep it again. A promise between us." "What are we promising?" Katherine asked, though in her heart, she already knew. His smile was tender as his thumb traced the curve of her cheek. "To build something lasting. Together." In the weeks that followed, Katherine and Matt's courtship progressed with a steady certainty of two people who recognized in each other not just desire, but partnership. Matt visited the cabin daily, helping with chores before returning to his duties at Hollister Ranch. On Sundays, they attended church together in town, their linked hands drawing knowing smiles from neighbors. As November brought the first dusting of snow to the high country, Matt arrived at the cabin one evening with Mrs. Hollister beside him in the wagon. "Hope you don't mind the surprise," he said as he helped the older woman down. Mrs. Hollister had something she wanted to discuss with us. The ranch owner settled herself at Katherine's small table, her shrewd eyes taking in the cozy cabin with approval. "You've made a proper home here," she observed. "Done what many said couldn't be done." "Thank you," Katherine replied, serving tea in her mother's china cups, one of the few treasures she'd brought from Boston. "It's becoming more comfortable each day." Mrs. Hollister nodded, her expression turning serious. "Matthew tells me you two have an understanding." Katherine glanced at Matt, who stood by the fireplace, a slight flush coloring his tanned face. "We do," she confirmed, warmth spreading through her chest at the simple acknowledgement.
Good.
"That's as it should be." Mrs. Hollister took a sip of tea before continuing. "I'm getting old, children. These bones aren't what they used to be, and running the ranch gets harder each year." Matt straightened, concern crossing his features. Mrs. Hollister, she waved away his interruption. Let me finish, boy. I've been thinking on this for some time now. My sons have their lives in California, with no interest in returning to Wyoming. The ranch needs younger hands, a future. Her gaze moved between Matt and Katherine. I'm proposing to sell you the Hollister Ranch, the northwestern section that borders this property. Matt's jaw dropped in shock. Madam, I could never afford. I'm not finished, she interrupted firmly. 100 acres, including the line cabin and grazing rights. You'd pay me a percentage of profits for 5 years, after which the land would be fully yours. You could combine it with Miss Vance's property here, make something substantial. Katherine's mind raced with the implications. Together, their land would form a viable ranch enough to support a family, to build a future beyond mere survival. Why would you do this for us? She asked the older woman. Mrs. Hollister's weathered face softened. I've watched Matthew grow from a grieving boy into a man any mother would be proud to call son. He's earned this chance. And you, Miss Vance, you've shown the kind of grit this territory respects. Together, you could make something lasting. She smiled slightly. Besides, I'm not getting any younger, and I'd like to see this land in good hands before I'm too old to enjoy watching it flourish. That night, after Mrs. Hollister had returned to the ranch, Matt and Katherine sat before the fire, discussing the unexpected opportunity. Snow had begun falling outside, soft flakes that whispered against the windows and promised a white blanket by morning. It's more than I ever dared hope for, Matt admitted, his voice hushed with wonder. Own land, raise horses like I've always dreamed. And, with you beside me. He trailed off, overwhelmed by possibility. Katherine leaned against his shoulder, watching the dancing flames. It feels like fate, doesn't it? As if all our paths were leading to this moment. Matt's arm tightened around her. Like those shooting stars were promises after all. The first heavy snow of winter arrived in early December, transforming the landscape into a pristine white expanse that glittered in the pale sunlight. Matt had taken to staying at Katherine's cabin when weather threatened, sleeping on a pallet before the fire rather than risking the journey back to Hollister Ranch in darkness. On one such evening, as wind howled around the cabin's sturdy walls and snow piled against the windows, they sat close before the fireplace, wrapped in the quilt Katherine's mother had made years ago. The intimacy of their position, her back against his chest, his arms around her waist, would have scandalized Boston society, but here in their private world, it felt right and natural. I've been thinking, Matt said, his deep voice rumbling against Katherine's back, about what Mrs. Hollister offered, about our future. Katherine turned slightly to see his face, lit golden by the firelight. And I think we should be married, he said simply. Before Christmas, if you're willing. Start our lives together proper. Build our home together from the beginning. Joy bloomed in Katherine's chest, expanding until she could scarcely breathe around it. Yes, she whispered, reaching up to touch his beloved face. I'd marry you tomorrow, if we could. His kiss was tender at first, then deepening with a passion they'd kept carefully restrained. When they finally parted, both breathing quickly, Matt rested his forehead against hers. I love you, Katherine Vance, he said, the words clearly spoken for the first time, though they'd been implied in 1,000 actions. Have since that first night under the stars. And I love you, Matthew Tanner, she replied, her voice steady with certainty. More than I thought possible. They were married on the winter solstice, the longest night of the year, made bright by lanterns and candles in Sweetwater's small church. Mrs. Hollister stood as Matt's family, while Sheriff Reeves gave Katherine away in her father's stead. The bride wore her mother's lace veil over her best blue dress, and the groom a new suit purchased for the occasion, his usually unruly hair tamed and his face clean-shaven. Their vows, spoken in clear voices that carried to every corner of the church, were simple but profound promises of loyalty, respect, and enduring love. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Matt's kiss was both reverent and possessive, drawing good-natured cheers from the gathered townspeople who had come to respect the determined young woman from Boston and the quiet cowboy who loved her. The wedding supper was held at the hotel, the dining room festooned with pine boughs and red ribbons for the Christmas season. As the evening progressed, snow began falling again, large flakes drifting past the windows like feathers. "We should go before the roads become impassable," Matt murmured to his bride as the celebration continued around them. "I've prepared the line cabin on our new property. It's closer than your place." Their departure was accompanied by knowing smiles and traditional ribald jokes, which Matt endured with good grace, while Katherine blushed prettily beside him. The short journey to the line cabin passed in comfortable silence, both aware of the threshold they were about to cross. The cabin Matt had prepared was small but snug, a fire already laid in the hearth, the simple bed made up with fresh linens. He carried Katherine across the threshold in the traditional manner, setting her gently on her feet before closing the door against the winter night. For a moment, they stood looking at each other, suddenly shy despite weeks of growing intimacy. "I should light the fire," Matt said, moving toward the hearth. Katherine caught his hand, stopping him. "Matthew," she said softly, "we're home." The wonder in his eyes at her simple declaration melted any remaining uncertainty. Their coming together that night was tender, passionate, occasionally awkward, but ultimately perfect in its sincerity, two people giving themselves completely to each other, holding nothing back. Afterward, as they lay tangled together beneath warm blankets, Matt traced the curve of Katherine's bare shoulder with gentle fingers. "Happy?" he asked, a trace of vulnerability in his voice. Katherine raised herself on one elbow to look down at her husband, memorizing his features in the soft glow of the banked fire. "Completely," she assured him. "And you?" His smile was answer enough, but he pulled her closer and whispered against her hair, "More than I ever thought possible." They spent Christmas Day in the line cabin, exchanging simple gifts, a hand-knitted scarf from Katherine, a delicate silver locket from Matt, and making plans for their future. They would expand Katherine's cabin in the spring, adding rooms for the family they hoped to create. Matt would begin building the horse breeding operation he'd long dreamed of, while Katherine would expand her garden and perhaps start a small dairy business with the milk cows. The winter passed in a haze of contentment as they divided their time between the line cabin and Katherine's original home, gradually combining their possessions and their lives. They worked side by side during daylight hours, tending livestock, repairing structures, preparing for spring planting, and spent evenings planning their future, reading aloud from Katherine's small collection of books, or simply enjoying each other's company before the fire. On a clear February night, with stars brilliant in the cold sky, they stood wrapped in a shared blanket on the porch of Katherine's cabin, now their primary home, until the spring building could begin. "Look," Matt said suddenly, pointing upward. A shooting star blazed across the heavens, its fiery trail briefly illuminating their upturned faces. "Another fell tonight," Katherine whispered, leaning back against her husband's solid chest. "What shall we wish for this time?" Matt's arms tightened around her, his lips brushing her temple. "Nothing," he replied softly. "I already have everything I could wish for." Katherine turned in his embrace, reaching up to touch his beloved face. "As do I. But perhaps we should keep this one anyway, for the future." His smile, visible even in the dim starlight, warmed her more effectively than the blanket around them. "Let's keep it again," he agreed, bending to brush his lips against hers. A promise for all the years to come. As winter reluctantly yielded to spring, Katherine discovered she was carrying their first child. The news, shared on a bright April morning as they watched the sun rise over their expanding property, brought tears to Matt's eyes and a tenderness to his touch that made Katherine fall in love with him all over again. A baby, he marveled, his hand gentle on her still, flat stomach. Our baby. Their plans accelerated with the news. Construction began immediately on the addition to the cabin 2 new rooms that would eventually become bedchambers for their growing family. Matt hired 2 young men from town to help with the building while he focused on establishing the horse breeding operation that would be their primary source of income. By June, Katherine's condition was becoming visible, her dresses requiring adjustment to accommodate her changing figure. Mrs. Hollister, who had become like a mother to them both, visited regularly, bringing practical advice about childbirth and infant care along with gifts for the coming baby, tiny garments knitted by her own hands, a cradle that had held her sons decades earlier. Sheriff Reeves, too, showed his support in practical ways, arranging for the doctor from the next county to check on Katherine monthly and delivering letters from her few remaining connections in Boston. The community that had initially viewed the young woman from the East with skepticism had come to embrace her as one of their own, impressed by her determination and her obvious happiness with the quiet cowboy everyone respected. On a warm evening in late summer, with Katherine's time drawing near, they sat on the porch of their expanded home, watching the sunset paint the western sky in hues of gold and crimson. Katherine, her hands resting on her swollen belly, felt the baby move vigorously within her. Active tonight, she commented, guiding Matt's hand to feel the strong kicks. Just like his father, always in motion. Matt smiled, wonder crossing his face as he felt their child's movements. Could be a girl, he pointed out. Strong like her mother. Either way, this child will be loved, Katherine said softly. More than we ever were as children. Matt nodded, his expression solemn. That's a promise I intend to keep above all others. As darkness settled around them and the first stars appeared overhead, they remained on the porch, reluctant to move from the peaceful moment. Suddenly, a brilliant streak of light cut across the heavens, a shooting star burning bright against the indigo sky. Another fell tonight, Matt whispered, his arm tightening around Katherine's shoulders. Let's keep it again. Katherine leaned her head against her husband's shoulder, contentment filling her heart. For our child, she agreed. A promise of love and protection always. Their daughter, Sarah Elizabeth Tanner, was born on the first day of autumn, a robust baby with her father's blue eyes and a dusting of dark hair that promised to be as rich as her mother's chestnut locks. The birth was difficult but uncomplicated, with Mrs. Hollister and the county doctor in attendance while Matt paced anxiously outside the bedroom door. When finally allowed to enter, Matt approached the bed where Katherine lay, exhausted but radiant, their tiny daughter cradled in her arms. His hands trembled as Katherine placed the swaddled infant in his arms, and tears filled his eyes as he looked down at the perfect face of their child. She's beautiful, he whispered, awe in his voice. Just like her mother. As autumn deepened toward winter, their little family settled into new rhythms centered around Sarah's needs. The horse breeding business showed promise, with 2 maras in foal for spring and interest from buyers as far away as Denver. Katherine recovered her strength gradually, learning the arts of motherhood with Mrs. Hollister's guidance and discovering depths of love she hadn't known existed. On the anniversary of their first meeting that fateful evening when a lone cowboy had found a stranded Boston lady at a desolate way station, Matt surprised Katherine with a special dinner after Sarah had been tucked into her cradle for the night. 1 year, he said, raising his glass of cider in a toast. The best year of my life. Katherine's smile illuminated her face, the happiness of the past 12 months evident in her eyes. The first of many, she responded, touching her glass to his. After dinner, Matt led Katherine outside, where the October night was clear and cold, stars glittering like diamonds against black velvet. He wrapped a warm blanket around her shoulders and drew her close against the autumn chill. I have something for you, he said, reaching into his pocket. In his palm lay a delicate silver pin, crafted in the shape of a shooting star. Had it made in Cheyenne, he explained as Katherine touched it with wondering fingers. To remember all our promises. Katherine's eyes filled with tears as Matt pinned the silver star to her shawl, his large fingers surprisingly deft with the tiny clasp. "It's perfect," she whispered, reaching up to touch his beloved face. "Just like everything we've built together." As if in response to her words, a brilliant streak of light cut across the heavens, a shooting star burning so bright it momentarily cast shadows across the land they had made their own. "Another fell tonight," Matt murmured, his arms tightening around his wife as they watched the fiery trail fade into darkness. Katherine turned in his embrace, her eyes reflecting starlight and the deeper glow of enduring love. "Let's keep it again," she said softly, "for all the years to come." And they did, through the birth of their son 2 years later, through seasons of plenty and seasons of hardship, through the gradual expansion of their ranch and their reputation for fine horses, through decades of shared joys and sorrows. Each shooting star they witnessed became another promise kept between them, a covenant of love that began on a lonely night in Wyoming Territory when a cowboy offered safe passage to a woman alone, and fate aligned their paths beneath the vast canopy of stars. Years later, their grandchildren would beg for the story of how Grandma Katherine and Grandpa Matt had met, how they had promised under a shooting star, and how Grandpa had said, "Another fell tonight, let's keep it again." The tale became family legend, passed down through generations, a reminder that sometimes the greatest journeys begin with a single step of trust, and the brightest futures are built on promises kept beneath falling stars.